Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Welcome to ThePrint SoftCover. This is a platform where we launch non-fiction books, and for today's edition, we have a very, very special book, and I've loved reading this so much. So we have Regrets None by Dolly Thakore and Arghya Lahiri. I think all of us can hold for like
there
1
we are.
second.
There we are.
Yeah. So I have been also a literature student in Dolly, ma'am. You've also been a literature student. So I think I'll start in a very typical literature style. So tell me, like the title of the book. Usually as a literature student, we start with the title of the book when we start our dissecting in a way. So Regrets None is arresting. It's fascinating because I think that's what we constantly also say, that nobody wants to have any regrets in their life. And yet, every other day, I think we start saying I regret that moment or something. So please tell us how not to have regrets in our life. I think everybody would really want to know that, how not to have regrets.
Maybe because I've reached the age that I have, so I don't have any regrets about anything that I've done.
So when we your name is something that literally needs no introduction in a way. You've added another layer to your existing list of achievements in a way, which is that of an author. But all of us know you. Most of us know you as a theater personality. And then, the more I read into the book, and then I think in every chapter, every few pages, I knew more about the new jobs you've taken up, the roles that you've taken up, from radio to the casting director of Gandhi to as a writer to somebody who's worked extensively in theater. So I just wanted to know, so you had a show where you were Kavita Mehta for a long time. We had taken up the name of Kavita Mehta. So radio now has changed significantly, I would say. I think you have a whole culture of RJs now. So I wanted to know, so what would Kavita Mehta do, let's say in 2021? What would her show look like? Or what would we get to hear on the Kavita Mehta show if it was going on in 2021?
Kavita Mehta was a name that I was forced to adopt seconds of going on the air, because this was in London. I was broadcasting for the Central Office of Information, and they said, announce your name. And I said, Dolly Rawson. But I was doing something called London newsletter. And it was all about publicity of London and its parliament and its politics and all. And they said, no, we can't have a British sounding name doing publicity for Britain. So they said, change your name. And within seconds, the names that came up, one was Kavita, because she was a very attractive, very accomplished young woman, and she was in class with me. And so I took her first name, couldn't take the full name, so I had to take the Mehta, which was quite a generic name in London in those days. The Patels and Mehtas had just arrived into England. They were taking over all of UK. So I took the name Kavita Mehta, and I broadcast as Kavita Mehta. I did Hindi broadcast as Kavita Mehta for all the 4 years that I was there. That has never used again.
But I think also Tina's asking, if Kavita Mehta were to have a show today, what would you be talking about on air?
Yeah.
More or less the same things, and more concentration on women's problems.
Right.
Because the awareness of women has become so good. I'm just reviewing a book, in fact, on about a politician and how a woman in South India became a politician and her life. And it's the most interesting thing that I've read in recent times. So, that awareness is still very much a part of my life, and I'm doing that.
So like you mentioned, you were forced to take a more, let's say, Indianized or a Desi name that suited, let's say, the show. would the show, let's say, if you actually have this show, would you rather call it with your famous introduction that you gave to Simi Garewal and just say, it's Dolly from Delhi and she's doing this show now?
Now it's very much Delhi, and Dolly is reasonably known and recognized. So I would now do it as Dolly Thakore.
Okay. So I also wanted to know, you've worked so much in areas that, PR, let's say, something I don't think we would even call it PR in a way back then. The way we do now, like the way we have like companies with a whole section of PR doing the kind of things that you were doing back then.
First PR job that I did was the launching of the cottage industries in Mumbai.
Mm-hmm.
I used to work for O&M, and cottage industries was their account, and they suddenly threw me into it and said, it's being inaugurated today and you have to take over. And I didn't know what PR was. I just went ahead and invited people and everybody was there and the press wrote about it, and that's how PR became part of my life. And I've been involved in things like that for all the years that I've lived.
So, which is why, this is more of like a speculative, fun take in a way from my end, because I was trying to think, if let's say you are the PRO of these people, Rahul Gandhi, Arvind Kejriwal, Mamata Banerjee, three people right now who grab headlines constantly. And I don't think Modi ji needs a PR officer. He's doing it quite well.
Fortunately, they're all three people who I believe in some of their policies and I go along with. So I would do good PR for them.
Please just give us one at least sample of like what would you do in order to like build an even better image in a way? Like,
look, Arvind Kejriwal has just gone in for doing Vipassana.
Mm-hmm.
And I did Vipassana also. And I know how it changes your approach to life and thinking. And that is a huge, big plus for Kejriwal. So I would like to promote that a great deal.
And anything for Mamata? Because she's, again, the bipolar is coming up for her, let's say.
I don't know Calcutta politics that well. I don't know Mamata ji personally. And I'm a very personal person. Like I met Arvind Kejriwal when he launched Gurcharan Das's book in Delhi at the IIC. So, I love these kind of little associations that have traveled with me through my life. And so I take a personal interest in those kind of things.
Okay. Arghya, I wanted to ask you, so this is your second book, right? And you have also worked for 2 decades in the theatre industry. So tell us, how has this collaboration been? Because as a reader, when I'm reading this memoir, it feels so much like, it partly obviously is a fascinating entry into the kind of times where probably when we say independent women, that was already a very limited species, if I may say it so, right? And then to take the readers into that era in a way, independent, just before independence, and, the whole new India phase.
Right.
So how was the journey for you? Like as a person who's, also getting to know all of this and putting them into words, but also generally the collaborative process. Please tell us more about that.
As I've told people a few times while we've been working on this book, well, since it's come out actually, I'm going to take some credit for it getting finished. She started working on it in 1982, but we've known each other for over 20 years. She's someone I've known for a very long time. She is the mother of one of my closest friends. She's also a very close friend of mine. She's also someone I've directed several times. We have a working relationship going back over 17 years. We worked on difficult things together. We get along, and somewhere along the way, she became a quasi-parent as well. So in 2015, we were working on a play. And one of the things that you do have to do for DT now, if you're working with her on a play, is you have to go and run lines with her. So we were running lines and we were chatting, and she told me the story, which is also in the book, of how she quit smoking. And I heard the story and I said, you know what, you should be writing a book. So she said, Actually, I started writing one about 35 years ago. And I turned to Kwasar, her son, um, a few weeks after that, and I said, look, if she says she started this thing, she should definitely finish it. And if she feels like she needs some help getting it over the line, I'd be happy to help because I think that the stories need to be out in the world. And then, of course, here we are 6 years later. Um, what was interesting, what was of particular interest to me, Tina, was two things. Uh, and the third thing I'll tell you about, and it kind of feeds into the questions you've been asking her thus far. But two things. One is I wanted to capture as much as possible her voice, which to me is one of the voices I hear in my head because it is warm, it is wise, it is very funny, it is actually incredibly wicked. But it's not something that people associate with her generally. I find that she has a wealth. I mean, there is nothing that I can't go to her about, whether it's career, whether it's work, whether it's personal stuff, whether it's grief. I have gone to her for all of these things. And I've received advice that always makes sense, filtered through an incredible spectrum of experience. So I wanted that voice on paper. And I also, her life is insane. She's been everywhere, she knows everybody, but also it's epic in its sweep. She was born just before independence. She has seen every single iteration of this country, good and bad. She grew up as a defense forces kid, who was so very middle class. She was a woman, she was a minority. And it's not that she was born a trailblazer, but she blazed the trail for herself. Everywhere she went, she asked why or why not, and another thing opened itself up for her because she was willing to take it on. And as a consequence, she has this, it's just an incredible life. And those two things were very important for me. And the thing that I wanted to say that links into the question you were asking, my partner is reading the book, Auntie, you'll be happy to know. For the first time. She hasn't read a draft yet. She started reading it a couple of days ago. At some point, past 11 o'clock last night, she turned to me and went, this woman never said no to anything. And I said, no, she didn't. And she said, that's why. And I was like, yes. She's just unafraid at a fundamental level. So those were the things that were interesting to me. In terms of the collaboration, she had vast amounts of notes across those 35 years. I went through all of them. We sat down. We did a lot of, I mean, calling them interviews is wrong. We just chatted. We chatted for hours and hours and hours and hours. And then we just started to put it together. And she'd tell me what worked, what didn't work, what she liked, what she didn't like. And we just found a way to tell the story together.
Okay, back to you. So you've worked the most in theatre, and right now, like when we say Dolly Thakore, and the other day when I was telling somebody, like a friend of mine, that I'm going to get to interview her in a way or talk to her in a way, and they went like, oh my God, okay, I now envy your job because so they're like, and so that added to my nervousness. That's a different thing, but so I just wanted to ask. So I remember, I think a couple of years ago, I read this headline, which said that so it's a play that you've been associated with, the Vagina Monologues. So I remember one article I read when I was younger, when the play I think opened, and and I remember as a teenager opening that magazine. And that headline had this, obviously the title, and I was closing it up because I was like, oh my God, my parents should not see this, right? And I remember this headline simply because it says that since 15 years, I think it was around 2017, from that headline must be from around then, that for the last 15 years, Vagina Monologue has been giving Indians the sex talk. So I am very curious now that I have the opportunity to know, since you have been associated for so long, what has been the audience response to this play, and what any response that particularly stands out?
Absolutely fantastic. And I'm so proud to be associated with it. I can't tell you how many minds we've changed, how many attitudes we've changed. the kind of stories and confidences that people have shared with us. It was an event that was waiting to happen. And it's been a fabulous journey being on the project. I mean, we've had to turn away people because we'd had 13-year-olds and 14-year-olds coming to see it, but our cutoff point is 15 years of age. And it's for many years, it just ran houseful everywhere we went. We were at one time intimidated by thinking that the politician would object or that there would be political party would, but none of that happened. We had all of them, I won't mention names, but lots of prominent people who came and saw the play and wrote very good things in our book. We've maintained books, and hopefully Mahabano Modi Kotwal, who's our producer and director, is one day going to bring out the book. We've got 20 books of comments that people have written after each show, and from a diverse section of people, from young girls to old women to grandmothers to mothers-in-law, the lot. It's been a fantastic journey. I mean, the first thing that happened, which I think is also in the book, I can't remember, but with the opening night of Vagina Monologue at the Prithvi Theatre, I had an 80-year-old man come and touch my feet. Now, I was 20 years younger then. And he, and he said, I'm so happy to be alive at this time, to see how far the Indian woman has gone. And that was such a nice thing to hear at that time. And then we've had couples celebrating their engagements on the stage with us after the show, popping champagne to celebrate their wedding anniversaries. We've had people fainting because it reminded them of sexual abuse that they have had with during their work life or family life or whatever. So every single thing that is mentioned is a part of a woman's life that we have gone through, but we've kept it hidden for so long. And Vagina Monologue has given everyone an opportunity to talk about it, air it, and I can't tell you how much good it has done. I think we've done the psychologists and psychoanalysts out of work.
Actually, coming to something that you just mentioned, which is also like something that really struck me when I was reading, like at least the initial phase, you talk about harassment and molestation as well, like even as when you were in, with your family, even with your sister, I think you mentioned. And so while reading it, one thing was that these were instances that really stood out for me. I think probably more as a female reader. What I wanted to know was, was it reliving in a way, or, when you were sharing or writing, was it very different? Like, what was the experience like when you were writing? Because again, what struck me, I think, is that they are spoken, the lines are so direct, when you're reading it, it just like comes up all of a sudden, almost like how the incidents also happen, right? That there is nobody knows, who could be somebody who could potentially sort of harass or molest you. Obviously never. And for a woman, it's always a risk area where, you never know the person you've known all your life, the neighbor you've, known for some time, it's never. And to argue as well, because when you're collaborating and listening to it, did any particular incident stand out as like very harrowing in a way? Because these are like, for me at least, they felt like very, where you're looking at things like, okay, this was happening. I think because the silence is so much around like the basic idea of, specifically when it comes to children, I think.
Again, I have mentioned in the book, this guy on Colaba Causeway shoving his finger up my arm. I mean, that was the most traumatic thing that I've ever witnessed. And that nobody turned a hair. I mean, I ran after him, but nobody bothered. And this was at 12 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It wasn't even night or evening or shadowed or anything like that. And that is what shocked and surprised me, that men get away with anything. And, the woman is helpless. There's nothing. And there's a police station right opposite this place where this happened. And there was no response from anybody. And that is what, you know, that's the boldest episode that I can recall. But then I've known right through the years various people who we called uncles. In those days, we called every father's friend uncle. Or lots of uncles trying to act fresh with young girls of 13, 14, and having affairs with officers' wives or whatever. And, you know, but everybody turned a blind eye to that and a deaf ear. So today we are talking about it. And it's given women the courage to be bold enough and mention it. Otherwise, all the time, mothers will say, shh, you can't mention it. You don't talk about it. Or, nahi, khandan mein kya ho jayega, badnaami ho jayegi. Or, unke liye aise nahi kehte. Tum nahi kuch kara hoga. You know, we've been brought up with that kind of conditioning. But all that is changing, as you can see. The Me Too movement. Look where it's taking people. Okay, some of them may be exaggerated, but it has made people aware of the kind of things that happen. And as I said, my first experience was when I was, I think, experience of seeing a sexual thing was at the age of 5, I think I was, or 6. And I saw this man, the truck driver, masturbating. And at that time, you didn't know what it was, but you knew there was a certain kind of excitement, a certain kind of wanting to see, you know, what is happening. But you never went and told your parents about it. My sister and I will talk about it now, but I don't think at that time we even discussed it. Parents have now got far more conscious and aware of it. And it's in some ways a good thing, and in some ways rather sad that innocence is not there anymore. I know there was a little girl, 8-year-old, a beggar, who sat outside Mahim Causeway, and she sat with her legs wide apart with no panty on. And we drivers, as we were driving past, saw that. So you can imagine how that would turn on a male driver who was driving past. So, you know, we are, I mean, the parents or society or education or whoever it is to be blamed for these kind of attitudes that the woman has and the man.
So there's generally this, I think, system of silence that we sort of practice, like the way you said already, that, you know, when, you know, as a 5-year-old, when you saw that, you know, we knew instinctively, we know that something is off or let's say wrong, but again, we don't obviously by then have the language to sort of speak about it, or somehow we know automatically that probably even speaking to parents might lead to some sort of censorship that would come on us probably, rather than, you know, the consequences being faced by, let's say, the other person who's actually doing something wrong, I guess. So sort of moving on to a very different direction from this. Gandhi. Now, Gandhi, the film, I don't think it's fair to call it a film anymore. I think it's a phenomenon. And it's a ritual that whether or not you're Indian, everybody, I'm sure, has gone through that ritual of, you know, watching the film. So how does it feel, like, A, obviously, to be associated with such a phenomena? And secondly, if I was wondering if you had anything that maybe the book doesn't cover, and maybe you could share something that stands out even now. Because obviously reading your book already feels like, you know, sometimes accidentally coming upon somebody's personal diary and then opening it and then getting all of the excitement. Because there's this feeling, like that's what I was also discussing with somebody, that, you know, there's this constant feeling where you feel slightly also like you're doing something forbidden. And it's so enriching, though, that you just can't stop. So, yeah.
Right.
I don't think on Gandhi we had any such incidents. We were all very well protected, including the cast. But as I shared in the book, I was in charge of Ben Kingsley and looking after Ben Kingsley in an indirect way. I wasn't kind of following him around everywhere, but one had to be careful that the press didn't get to see him having a glass of beer. In fact, this happened, and the next day it was headlines. I think it was in Hindustan Times. Gandhi caught having beer. I mean, so ridiculous about these things. He was playing a part. Then certainly he was a very attractive young man at that time, and there were enough number of aspiring women who wanted to be associated with him, and so we had to keep that at bay. But it wasn't difficult, and we were very protective of the reputation of the people on the Gandhi unit. But one interesting thing, which is not in the book, and it's got nothing to do with sexuality or anything like that, but the retinue of horses was moving to Delhi to take part in that episode of South Africa where they say down, down, when they attacked by the police on horses. And I was the PRO of the unit. So I was phoned up by reception to say, Madam, these trucks have arrived with the horses. So I rang the production manager or the assistant director or something. And I said, the man who was in charge of the horses, George Compton was his name or something. And I said, Jerry, the horses have arrived. Go sleep with them. It was a matter of thing. I mean, so what if the horses have arrived? They've arrived. Take care of them. That was a very, and I was trembling. I went down in my night dress almost because I didn't know what to do with these horses that had arrived from Jaipur. But it's all part of work. But there was nothing uncomfortable. There was nothing unsavory about anything. I don't know whether I have mentioned there was first on the day of the Mahurat of the film, or we had a Indo-British cocktail party so that the crew, the second unit and the first unit would get to know each other. And there was this gorgeous young man who was the third AD called Roy Button. I don't know where he is now. And on the Indian side, we had Kamal Swaroop, who is very well known in the Indian film industry. He's done a lot of films and things. And Kamal Swaroop was the third AD. But Kamal Swaroop couldn't care a damn about anybody. And so this Roy Button, this handsome young guy, British, all that, he turned around, leaned over a table and said to Kamal Swaroop, get me a glass of water. Kamal Swaroop said, Raj went a long time ago. So it was fabulous, the way he handled it. And, so these are some of the things that I remember, but we never had any major incidents of that kind.
Okay. Arghya, you mentioned how you've been anyway closely associated with Dolly for like a significant amount of time. So I actually wanted to know, sometimes when you know somebody very well, I feel like it's very difficult to distance yourself, from the person when you're writing, about them and, with all of the intimate details about their life. Right. So how was it a difficult process for you? Because you also know somebody already very well. Like it's not an assignment in a way, like it's just a professional thing. And even if you're following somebody or interviewing somebody, this is like impersonal, like you're not invested otherwise, because you are obviously, again, otherwise invested.
Right.
So, I'm very curious to know about that because, I feel like that distancing, like how did you manage that actually?
I have to say, the credit is all Dolly's. There's two things here. One is because of our work in the theatre, we have developed the ability to leave sort of the personal ego at the door. Otherwise, you can't work. And by this, I mean, you are vulnerable around people, particularly in rehearsal. That's what it's for. It's not that we're weeping in each other's arms, but you deal with difficult texts. When you deal with emotions, obviously the thing about emotions, you can't control it. And to be able to feel these things, you need to be at a sort of transparent, very open place. And we try and, we work in this fashion, and we understand how to be careful. Beyond that, it's just a testament to, I think, just how openly she leads her life. She didn't shy away. I mean, there are times where she'll say, we can't put that in the book because and most of the time that is to do with other people because they are not her stories to share. Right. But in a conversation, things come up and she says, that happened. But I don't think we can mention that because that's somebody's personal matter. But she never held back, and I think it's testament to her and the way she's lived her life. That it all comes from this. Nothing is hidden. It's all what you see is what you get, and she's incredibly confident in herself, and doesn't feel even sharing the not overwhelmingly positive details. She doesn't feel like they diminish her because she's been able to live through those things, absorb the lessons they have to offer, and carry on with her head held very high, which is why she can say regrets none. She wears them. She's very secure about who she is. So that it wasn't difficult at all.
So actually, this would be the last question, unfortunately. But what you just said, actually, that, Dolly's secure about who she is. And like I said, like that introduction, Dolly from Delhi. Even today, of course, let's say if you look at smaller towns, women who are still trying to become, let's say, somebody as confident as you, who's trying to say, look, I am, X from this place, right? With the same amount of confidence. What would be the advice, if any, that you would give, or suggestion that you would any for women who are also trying to, let's say, lead the kind of lives that they want to, with no roadmaps? Because I think that's one of the things that the book brings out the best. I think that there was no roadmap at all. There is nobody else who would have done whatever you did, I think, Dolly, because every job, even you mentioned, all of the opportunities, all of the things, and you mentioned, you like doers, and you yourself are that.
Fact that I came from a family where there was no education, formal education or university education as such, and yet the women in my family went on to do such great things. My aunt, my mother's eldest sister, who was a nurse, she worked on and she brought Pandit Nehru back to life at one point. So look at the contrast. From a humble background to working with the Prime Minister's household. So, and that gave all of us a lot of confidence. You weren't scared of who you were. My aunt, who is 97 years old, and she's still with me today, after she retired from the Convent of Jesus and Mary, which many of you may have heard of in Delhi, was the big, when she retired after 35 years from there, when Rajiv Gandhi became Prime Minister and Sonia Gandhi, and they were advised that the children shouldn't go to school because politically things were hotting up everywhere. She went to Convent of Jesus and Mary to ask for a teacher who could tutor those children. At that time, the kids were 14, 13, or 15, about that age. And they recommended my aunt. And we don't come from a family where you are pulling strings and asking for favors. But it's a lot appreciated for the things that you do. And I think that has also touched upon me and my life. I have never asked anybody to do anything, and things have come my way. I was asked to commentate on the launch of the ISRO first satellite that went up in India. I know nothing about science. As I said, I'm a techno dumbo, and yet I did it. Similarly, I went on the Sagar Samrat, the first oil rig in India. The first person to go on that was Indira Gandhi, and the second one to go on that was me. Okay, Indira Gandhi went back to cut a ribbon there, but I went to commentate on it and meet the people and do a program on it. So, but it wasn't, as Arghya has very rightly said, I've never hesitated from doing anything. I've gone ahead and done it, and I've learned on the job. So my advice to all women, all young women is, go ahead and do it. Don't say, nahi, maa kya kahegi, dada kya kahegi, ye kya kahega, wo kya kahega. I've never done that. I don't know this. Go ahead and learn it. So what if you make mistakes? That's what life is for.
This has been like so amazing, like honestly, like thank you. And I think the last, particularly the line, because I think I was so nervous before this interview. I remember like furiously scribbling and trying to remember like half of, like obviously a part of me enjoying the book and the other part getting very nervous, I think. But I think this, like the whatever you just said, I think I'm going to really, really keep it at the core of whenever I feel like, okay, whether or not am I made for this, whether or not am I going to do this. I think this is an advice. And yeah, the philosophy, of course, to not have regrets. I think this book is anyway a testimony to that. And thank you so much for coming and speaking with us.
You say one more thing before I come. Yeah. I've just done a play,
right?
Turning Point. We had a show last night. It's my first Zoom play. I know nothing about technology. And there was I doing a Zoom play when my fellow actor was sitting in Bangalore, my director was in Calcutta, my stage manager was in Chennai, everybody was, and I was sitting in Mumbai. And we did that, and we had to put buttons on, switch things off, and we did it all. And without any major mishaps, I think that we managed and we succeeded, and we had rave responses from people.
Again, I think another nugget that I'm taking away right now, I think apart from whatever I have learned from the book, I think, thank you, for coming, both of you. And thank you for sharing all of the experience. And I think I felt like I was suddenly a part of the writing of the book because I could visualize all of whatever you had been talking about. Thank you so much again for being a part of today's SoftCover.
I have a lot to thank Arghya for, because I just loaded him with information. And poor guy, I don't know where Gulnar was at the time, but he managed to sift through all those piles of cuttings and papers and the interviews and the books that, because I've lived so long, so there was a hell of a lot being collated by everybody. He's done a marvelous job, and I'm very proud.
It was a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you, and thank you, Tina, for having us very much. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.